right. Good morning, good evening, and good afternoon, Ari.
Hey, how are you, Ben? Nice to see you again.
Good. I'm trying to do my best impression of Tim the Tap Man with Nick Merckx with my face into the camera right now, so don't mind me. Tell us, man, what are we up to today? Who are our guests, and what's the topic?
So we have amazing guests today. We have TechnoGeek and DKI, or Don Isabel, and you might be here, my cat. Sorry,
I was gonna say we have a very special guest today with your cat.
Yeah, she's also a guest here. I will introduce her later. But we are talking about not cats, but mobile hacking. So that will be awesome.
Yeah. So if you don't know, as already mentioned, Joel, aka TechnoGeek, and Don, aka DKI, both amazing mobile hackers, and we're going to talk about hopefully both Android and iOS. But before we get into that, I have to do some announcements. Or do you have anything you want to share before I jump into mine?
Actually, not today. So you will be the one doing the announcements.
Does your cat have anything she wants to say before we jump into this?
She says she loves you and she's happy to be here, part of the stream.
All right, quick announcements. Hacky Holidays, it is coming up. We're almost done with the challenges. Big shout out to Adam Langley. He's working on some of the web challenges, and we're also doing some Android levels this year. So we're going beyond web hacking. The level of toxicity is going to be going up a little bit more this year, and I hope you guys are all ready, because there's also prizes, a lot of prizes. So if you want to make some money right before the holidays, this is your chance to do and go participate in the Hacky Holiday Christmas/holiday CTF. Speaking of mobile hacking, if you are not already on Hacker 101, there are a ton of mobile hacking content on there, both from iOS and Android hacking. Actually, the iOS stuff is created by Dawn, who's also a guest today. We'll bring her up in just a few minutes. There's also a few, I want to say 3 levels on mobile hacking, more specifically on Android hacking. And if you go and solve those, you get a private invite to a bug bounty program on HackerOne. So these are private programs that are hosted on HackerOne. You get access to them, and you get to have some fun and maybe make some money or find some bugs and get more invites.
That's cool.
All right, chat, are you ready for our guest? Should we bring him on? I mean, if you guys say no, I'm still going to bring them on, but I want to hear people. I still want to hear people say yes. And if you don't say anything, we're still going to bring him on.
Yes.
Let's welcome our guest. There we go. There's a few yeses right there. Let's welcome our guests, Dawn and Joel, to the stream. How you guys doing?
Good. How are you?
Good. How you doing, Joel?
Doing good.
A little early for you?
Honestly, if you knew what time I woke up, this is pretty late for me.
Oof. All right. I think you sound like you're an early riser. So let's do a round of intros. I'm very familiar with the both of you. I've had the pleasure to work with both of you very closely in person. But Dawn, let's start with you. Who are you? What do you do? And how long have you been in your role?
Sure. So I'm Dawn Isabel. I'm the director of research at Now Secure, which is a company that provides products and services around mobile application security testing. I've been in this specific role with Now Secure for like 3 weeks because I just got promoted.
Congrats on the promotion.
Thank you.
Congrats.
Before that, I was on the research team there for a couple of years, but I've been doing mobile hacking since 2000 and I want to say about 2013-ish. And before that, just general like web app and network pen testing for longer than I care to really remember. We won't talk about how long total we've been doing that. So yeah, just say a long time.
Long enough to be good at your job. That's all.
Yes.
Okay. Yes. Fair enough.
Yeah.
That was actually one of my questions, so I will scratch that one right now.
Awesome. And yeah, I'm Joel. I also known as TechnoGeek. I'm an application security engineer at Tinder. I've been here for about almost a year now. Crazy. But before that, I was at Uber. I was also an application security engineer there. And then before that, I was basically just hacking. I've been mobile hacking since, I want to say, probably 2014 or 15. around then. I originally started hacking Snapchat and went from there.
So I couldn't help by stuff I just in there. I think both of you have very cool stories about how you, and this is a little bit off script, Ari, I apologize, but both of you have really cool stories about how you discovered HackerOne. How did you get involved with HackerOne? Can we, for what I think one of you can't particularly talk about the customer, or you can talk about the bugs you found, but can you tell us how you got involved with HackerOne? What's the story, Don?
So my initial introduction to HackerOne was actually through Jessie Kinzer, who I think is pretty well known in the community as Random Deduction. She and I met through some work contacts, and she was like, "Yeah, you have to get into this this bug bounty stuff with HackerOne." And so we met up in person in Vegas, and I think that was 2018.
Yeah.
And she got me an invite to the HackerOne event there. So that was the first live event that I had been to. And I sort of did some stuff off and on throughout like maybe the next year. Okay. It wasn't until 2019 that I feel like I actually like hit my stride with the mobile stuff and started finding some like really good bugs, really big bugs. Did some show and tells in 2019, early 2020. Pre-pandemic, pre-COVID. And I feel like kind of the rest is history from there.
Joel, what about you? How did you get involved with all this stuff?
So I didn't even know bug bounty was a thing until probably 2017, I think. I was working at NCC Group, and the person who sat across from me was a hacker you guys might know, known as Cool Boss. He was pretty well known especially for his Facebook bugs at the time. And he was like, "Hey, you do like a lot of mobile stuff. There's this like mobile CTF going on, to like, for run by HackerOne or whatever." And I didn't know what it was, but mobile hacking was sort of my thing. So I figured it would be fun. I did a lot of CTFs at the time, so it seemed like a pretty easy opportunity to get some points on the board. And so I started doing it, and I didn't really like have a full understanding of like even what the like prizes were and stuff. But one of the prizes was that you would actually get invited to H1702, the like Las Vegas live hacking event. And so I ended up being one of the finalist hackers in that CTF, and I was invited out to Vegas. And that was like my whole introduction to HackerOne. I remember I was there, and like I met like Franz Rosen, and like everybody's like, "Oh my God, it's Franz." And I was like, "Who?" And then like, so like it all, I was just like a total noob. I had no idea what was going on. And I found some really awesome bugs. I assume this is the one where I'm not allowed to say who, but or what. But yeah, I found a pretty cool bug that ended up leading me to meet some really awesome people later in life. And
did that also lead into one of your positions?
Yes.
It got you connected to some people that were there also and got you connected to your first.
Yes, yeah, it did get me my first job. Yeah,
I have this really like this image of you on the stage at H1702 just explaining your bug at 4 a.m. while I'm just tired. I want to go home, but it's so interesting. I'm just like, please, I want to go home. Wrap it up. But yeah, I know both of you guys came from live hacking events, and it's cool for us to kind of talk about how it's beyond just the bug bounty thing of hacking. It's you came to the events. Joel, in your case, you networked yourself, you found an amazing bug, you networked yourself, you got your first job, now you're moving on to another job, another position. Don, you met a hacker, didn't do bug bounties at all, and you came to one of our first events, and then you have been a part of the events ever since. I know you had one of the best bugs at H1415, the last one in person. I have a very good memory of that also being in front of you. I'm like, how do you find these things? So it's cool hearing both of you, came in a similar background, a similar way, but also doing amazing things on your own. And that the live hacking events had a huge impact in that sense as well.
Yeah, both actually great stories. And you are sharing how you met HackerOne, but I'm also interested in knowing how you get into mobile hacking, because that's definitely a topic. So how do you start? How do you actually, got interested in mobile from all the different type of assets? If you want to share, let's start with Dawn.
It was like a total accident actually for me. So, and again, this was back in like 2013. I was applying to new positions. At the time, I was a pen tester doing mostly web application pen testing. Had not done a heck of a lot of mobile at all. Maybe did a couple of source code reviews, but that was about the extent of it. So I applied for this role. And the hiring manager, who I think is also very familiar to the bug bounty community, which is Jason Haddix, he got in contact with me, you know, set up an interview. So I look at the title of the position that I'm interviewing for, and I was like, Jason, wait a minute. I applied for the AppSec position, not the mobile position. He's like, oh no, that's right. Yeah, that's what we're interviewing you for. And I was like, oh, okay. So I went in and interviewing for this mobile position, and I'm like, I don't know anything about mobile, but apparently they liked me well enough because they hired me. And so I kind of got just dropped in, you know, head first, 2 weeks of mobile boot camp, basically how to do mobile on both platforms, led by Jason. And that was kind of the start of it all. Like I really wasn't sure what I was getting myself into, to be honest. And I ended up just absolutely loving it. And obviously ever since that's been my focus.
That's awesome. What about you, Joel?
Yeah, so for me, I had come from, it was also like basically an accident for me. I had come from like really just like software development background. I was writing just like, I taught myself how to code, and I was just writing like personal projects, little things here and there, web apps, random stuff. And one of the things that I wanted to write was like a web-based Snapchat client. This was like the early days of Snapchat. And at the time there was like 1 or 2 reverse engineered APIs of it on GitHub, and they were like in PHP or something. And so I was like, oh, cool. Like, you know, I'll just use this. And while I was working on that project, that API eventually got like deprecated because they added some security features into the app. And this was like the very beginning of when they had started to add like mobile security libraries and stuff into the app. And so there was a group of people basically in like an issue, like a GitHub issue thread or something, that were like, hey, like, can we like work on updating this or whatever? And they're like, yeah, we got a Skype group going or whatever. Like, you know, DM me your username or whatever if you want to be added. And so like I got added in there, and there was just like a wealth of resources within there of just like people who had like done reverse engineering on mobile apps, especially Android apps, for like a couple of years already. And so like those people were like very useful and like fundamental in teaching me like the basics of like decompiling an app and like how to look at the code, and like, you know, and then it was sort of like a connection between like my coding knowledge and like trying to just like get to this objective where like I wanted to get that thing to work. So like, how do I get that thing to work? And just like figuring out how the code worked. And that was like my initial introduction into like mobile hacking. I ended up just having like a real affinity for it. And it sort of just took me from there.
Do you guys both do iOS and Android?
I'm mainly focused on Android. I have done both, but over time, I'd say it definitely leaned towards Android. Yeah,
and I'm the opposite. I mostly focus on iOS, and I do a little bit of Android here and there, but mostly only if I have to.
Interesting. Why? I'm curious to hear why. Let's start with you, Don. Why iOS over Android?
You know, it's funny because coming into mobile, I really knew more about the Android side of things because I had been a Java developer in the past life. So I understood Java really well. I didn't have a lot of problem like looking through the source code or, you know, things of that nature. But iOS really fascinated me because I feel like it's more of an adversarial environment to be in, period, because it's a closed environment, kind of a walled garden. And you're dealing with systems that are not open source, where there's sort of this vested interest in keeping you out of everything all the time. And I know some people find that exhausting, but I think it's really fun. It's fun to constantly be trying to sort of outwit and outsmart and find ways to make your things work when there's so many forces trying to stop you. It's just really, it's a lot of fun for me.
Yeah. And for me, like Android, like I said, like I came from a software development background, and so like for me, code is like king in my mind. And so like so like my day to day as an AppSec engineer, I do a lot of source code review, and so like reading code and understanding code and figuring out how things work from code has always been like the like most awesome thing in my mind about mobile hacking, especially with Android, where you can literally like get the code up until basically like native libraries. Like you can get the actual code and you can look at it, you know how it works. It's like right there. And so like that means that like there is no like security through obscurity with like Android. Like if they're doing something wrong, you can see it, like it's right there. And like if they're trying to do something sneaky, like it's also like right there. You just have to like figure out how they're doing it. Yeah. And like that challenge like really has like always like attracted me to it.
It's cool to have both of you saying the opposite of like, I was explaining similar answers, and it's great to hear just both complete opposite ends of it. But it makes sense. I mean, it's also like, it's what works for you, right? Whatever you enjoy doing the most, which seems like Don, iOS seems to be your thing. And Joel, based on what you said, Andrew's been your thing. But curious to hear what are some of the, so let's say I'm new to mobile hacking, and from now on we'll just assume Joel, you're gonna answer Android related stuff. Don, let's do iOS with you. I'm new to mobile hacking. I want to learn how to do the stuff that you guys do. I want to start the basics. I have no idea how to do any of this. Where do I go? What are some resources? What are some things you recommend? What are some things that helped you get better at these things? Joel, let's kick it off with you.
Okay, sure. Yeah, so right off the bat, I wrote a big blog post probably a year ago now for HackerOne. It has like basically like my intro, especially like Android related, for like how to get started with Android hacking. It talks about like the basic structure of like an APK, like how to like unzip it and then decompile the DEX into like class files or Java files and stuff like that. And it walks you through like all of that sort of fundamentals. It also talks a little bit about Frida. I imagine there's like a bunch of people who want to know about Frida. Frida's like a programming language in and of itself, kind of like you have to understand that like all Frida scripts are written in JavaScript. So like if that is like the barrier to entry, like right off the bat, like if you want to write Frida scripts, you got to know JavaScript at least to some extent so that you can write like valid JavaScript code and like read the documentation and stuff like that. I like me and Ben, maybe we could like sit down and do like a dedicated Frida episode one day or something. We can talk about that, but I won't like spend too much time diving into that. Frida is like a huge resource though. Frida, if you don't know, is basically like this like hooking framework. I don't even know how to describe it. It's just like if we're introspecting like code and processes, right? So like any process, it lets you like look at it at both like just like a process level, like, you know, what's the PID and stuff like that, but also like what are the symbols and like where is that symbol in memory, and let me like put a hook in there so that when that symbol gets called, my code gets called first, and I can look at the arguments that come in and I can modify it, or I can, you know, look at the return value after it's been called and see like what the output is and stuff. So it lets you do like so many things that it's like impossible to even dive into, but that's what like Frida is. Really like the main tools that I use are APK tool for like decompiling and decoding resources and stuff in the APK. Dex to jar to like actually like convert the Dex, like the compiled Android bytecode, into a jar file.
Yeah.
And then usually I use JADX to decompile the jar file into Java files, and then I use like VS Code or something. Any like whatever text editor you want. You can use Vim, you can Sublime, like whatever you want to open a folder and just look at files and search through files. Whatever the easiest thing for you is. I use Visual Studio Code for that, and that's pretty much it. And then Frida, of course. Like if I see something interesting in the code and I'm not 100% sure how it's working, or I can't quite figure it out, then I'll write up a quick Frida hook or something. I'll run the app on either an emulator or a physical device, and then I'll hook it with Frida and I'll see how it's behaving. For emulators, I either use Genymotion or the built-in AVD like tool that's built into Android Studio. It's free. Yeah.
Okay. Don, what about you?
So for folks who want to get started, there's a couple of resources these days that I point to that really didn't exist as much when I was getting started. I feel like back then it was stringing together a lot of blog posts and just a lot of knowledge that was floating out on the internet that wasn't necessarily all contained in one place, unless you were willing to shell out for, some sort of official class. But these days, I really like the OWASP MSTG, the Mobile Security Testing Guide, because it not only covers very broadly, a lot of different types of vulnerabilities, but how to test for them. And it walks through, the basics of what tools you might use on either platform. It gives examples for how to test for different things. So it almost gives you like a lab manual, start to finish, of how to get started, how to do certain things. You might not understand all of the fine points behind it, but you can walk through and try a lot of it out for yourself without needing all of the foundational knowledge to figure out how to craft a specific type of exploit or what to look for to find a particular vulnerability type. So I really like that as just like a really broad base. Obviously, as you mentioned, Hacker 101 has a lot of great training and videos. And I feel like the ones that I did for iOS give a pretty good overview, hit a lot of the high points of things that you would want to know if you're doing this specifically for bug bounty purposes. Yeah. Because there's certainly things that are, I think, more easily used in a bug bounty program than others in terms of iOS security. So it tries to give a foundation, but also give you some tools, to actually go after specific types of vulnerabilities. For me personally, in terms of like what I tend to use day to day, outside of on iOS, you kind of almost need a Mac and you need Xcode and you need a physical device. You can do some stuff on a simulator. You can analyze IPA files, which is the application package itself. But there's a point where in order to get further, you really need at least a device or a few devices. It's nice to just go out on eBay and buy some cheap devices that you don't really care about too much. Something that has an active jailbreak where, you're pretty confident you'll be able to work with it once it's jailbroken, and once you have access to sort of the internals of the device. So that's kind of the first thing, is kind of establish that lab environment. And then I do rely very heavily on Frida. Frida's been my main tool for many years in Mobile Now. Part of this does go back to, like Joel said, I was a developer before I was a hacker. And so I do tend to think about code and the way that code moves through systems and how I can insert myself into different points in the code. And that's something that Frida really excels at, because it really allows you to kind of be the application. Anything the application can do or see or interact with, your code can do by instrumenting it with Frida. So yeah. I have built out some of my own tools. There's a website called Frida CodeShare that has a lot of different snippets, including some of the snippets that I use in my own testing. And you can kind of try things out, see how people construct different types of instrumentation for different platforms. So that's kind of my primary tool for at least dynamic instrumentation. For more the static side of things, like looking at the actual binary itself, I'm partial to Radare, or R2 as it's sometimes known, because I'm just more of a command line kind of person. So I really enjoy the interface that Radare has for just looking at assembly and interacting with it. There's other folks who like a UI better, they are a graphical UI. And so there's other tools out there that might be better for people who are more graphically inclined and who are beginners and, need a more of an introductory tool for reverse engineering. So there's a lot of different offerings out there, some of which are open source. And I recommend people at least play around with some of those. You might not need that right away, but it's good to at least have that familiarity so it's not scary. And if you do need it, you kind of know how to go about using those tools.
And we're talking a lot about tools and devices and environment setups and things you were mentioning, Don. I think that's pretty interesting. And I will be honest with you. When I was back in the day, a pen tester in Deloitte, my past job, like 9 years ago or something like that. I was
in my days. I'm sorry, I have to make that joke.
Yeah. I am kind of old. I don't look like it, but I'm kind of old. And
the young guy heart, Artie.
I was some sort of, and I'm ashamed of saying
Grandpa,
this.
all right.
It's okay. We can be old together.
Chairs over here.
Welcome to the roast of Ari, featuring your host Joel and Dom.
Okay, we can change. I mean, ignore the question. Let's just roast me. It's even fun. No, come on. So yeah, I am 33 years old. I consider myself.
Oh, you're a baby! Oh my gosh, come on!
He's roasting himself. Welcome everybody to the roast of Ari.
Come on, I cannot even make the question now. But okay, yes, I have some experience, like 7, 9, 10 years old, something like that ago. Sorry. I used to be doing a lot of pen tests on iOS and Android, and then I got insanely rusty because I kind of stopped doing it. And I will say to you that everything I was doing back then doesn't make sense now. Not the same tools, not the same devices, not the same jailbreaks, not the same anything at all. Everything changed. So if I try to do that back, again, I am insanely rusty. I don't know where to go. So my question is, how do you actually keep track of all those things? Do you have resources that you actually go to? How do you know the latest jailbreak, which versions applies to the new tools? Frida is actually relatively new, maybe a couple of years ago, 3-4 years maybe, or something like that. So how do you go and keep track of all those new tools and new releases and the devices and the requirements you need to actually go and start doing pen tests or backboning in especially iOS? I think Android's a little bit different.
Yeah, I'd say it is tough because every year there's a new version of the operating system. There's, new requirements, new security features to think about. I mean, that's part of what I really enjoy about being in the mobile space. You never get bored. There's always new stuff to learn, but it is hard to hop in and out of, for sure. Like you almost have to stay on top of it all the time or not. There's not a lot of in between. For iOS, though, in terms of staying on top of things like jailbreak compatibility, there's actually a really good Reddit jailbreak group that I pretty much use as my go-to if I've picked up a device and I want to know what jailbreak is going to work with it. That's the first place I go. They have a huge spreadsheet that just lays out every device type, every jailbreak, what's compatible, what's not. They do a pretty good job of staying on top of that as new releases come out too, and as new jailbreaks become available. So that's kind of my go-to source. That's where I send people because you can get into a lot of trouble just like Googling for a jailbreak. There's a lot of shady stuff out there. I don't recommend that. Don't go, how do I jailbreak? And somebody is like, download me. No, don't please don't do that. Please. So yeah, I usually will send folks to that forum, and that's typically where I'll go as well, just to get the latest news.
I actually shared that in the chat. I think probably it's that one. Just correct me if it's not, but Reddit.
That's the right one. Yep.
Yeah. So that's pretty interesting. I wasn't aware of that one. I think Android actually doesn't have that problem, right? It's pretty much the same, I think. Of course, new tools and new things being released all the time, but definitely you don't need all the hard requirements, right, Joel?
Yeah. So Android definitely has that advantage where, like, for the most part, like, any issues you're going to have in terms of like rooting or like phone, like accessibility or like that stuff, it's usually like manufacturer to manufacturer. It's like, oh, I have a Samsung phone, so it has this problem. Or like you can usually buy another phone that's like just runs stock Android, like a Pixel or something, and then you can just turn on root or turn on ADB or whatever you need, and like it's not an issue. Some manufacturers are more strict than others, but yeah, that problem doesn't like, you don't have to like you go through all those hoops for the most part. Where you might run into some issues is like if you're trying to root an emulator and get it to work with like Google Play and stuff, that can be just a little bit tricky nowadays, where you have to like load a lot of that stuff onto the emulator yourself manually if you want it to work. Yeah, it is like nicer, but like to that point, like I will say, like this is one of the reasons where it's good to like focus on one or the other, like iOS or Android, because like keeping track of like everything in both spaces is like a lot of work. I get a lot of my news for Android stuff from Twitter mostly. Like it usually just pops onto my feed or it's through the InfoSec topics that I follow or the accounts that I follow. And honestly, Now Secure is also like a great resource for Android stuff. They do like a ton of Android research and they're like always on top of it. They are like a big sponsor of Frida. So like, the guy who wrote it works there.
It's true. I wasn't going to say anything.
Yeah. So yeah, no, it's pretty sweet. Before that, I used to use a thing called Script. I think it's how it's pronounced, like CYCRIP or whatever. Yeah, it was written by Sorik, I think, who wrote Cydia way back in the day. So, and then just Frida ended up just being something that like was more functional, like easier to instrument, and just like more developed, and it solved a lot of the problems that script had over time. And I mean, Frida had its own problems to begin with, but like now it's in such a state that it's very reliable.
Yeah, and it has some nice command line tools out of the box. Like if you don't really want to get into a lot of, writing JavaScript agents right off the bat, something like Frida Trace, which just allows you to trace functions and trace method calls. That's something that's very, very easy to get off the ground with. That's usually what I'll point people towards if they just want to get their feet wet with Frida and they're not really sure what it does yet or how they can use it. Tracing functions and methods in an app to see what they're doing, that's something that's pretty like universally understandable. And I feel like that's an easy way for people to engage with Frida and kind of figure out how they can best use it in their workflow. So it's nice that, you can just hit the ground running. You don't necessarily have to build this whole tool in order to make use of Frida. They include some really, really solid offerings in Frida tools right off the bat.
Yeah.
So you both mentioned Java and JavaScript a few times. I think when we're talking about tools, we just talked about jailbreaks, devices, and that sort of stuff. How important is it for someone who wants to get into mobile hacking to know how to code or be able to source code review? And what languages is important for them to learn in both cases, both iOS and Android? Don, let's start off with iOS, if you don't mind.
Yeah, so this is one of those quintessential debates, right? Is how much coding do you need to be able to do to be effective as a security professional? One of the things I really appreciate about mobile is it takes a lot of different skill sets, and you can come at it from a lot of different directions. You can come at it from a developer perspective. You can come at it from a forensics perspective, because there's so much going on forensically in terms of the file system and what an application might touch in terms of the operating system. You can come at it from the reverse engineering perspective. You can come at it from the network perspective. If you've done web app hacking and you're really accustomed to working in a proxy and interacting with traffic, you have to do that with mobile too. So you can kind of start with what you're familiar with and then grow into those other areas. And I think that just to do the hacking portion or to do bug bounty, you can be pretty effective without having like the coding chops. I think that the more advanced you get, the more you're going to start to feel the pain of not having that in your pocket, not being able to pull that out, whether it's because you want to write your own tool and there's not a tool out there that exists that does what you want to do. So you have to write your own, whether it's the fact that you found something really cool and you cannot get the developer to understand what the heck is going wrong. Like they're like, dude, I don't see that in my code. My code's not doing that. Like, can you show me? Because I have no clue. Like you have to be able to kind of bridge that gap. And it's much easier if you can speak that language, at least have a common vocabulary, even if you're not sitting there building apps. Like if you have the understanding to be able to say, this is where it's going wrong, this is what you need to look for. You can understand what a framework versus a module is. You can understand how libraries integrate. You understand the architecture of an application. Just some of those basics can get you a long way. From the iOS perspective, I think these days it's good to know at least some fundamentals for both Objective-C and Swift, if only to know how they differ once an application's compiled, and to know if you do want to use something like Frida Trace, how do I go about doing that? Like, what am I looking for? What does a method look like in Objective-C versus Swift? Can I do the same things in Swift that I can with Objective-C? And just knowing some of that can prevent you from spinning wheels and going down rabbit holes that are not going to get you anywhere.
What about for Android, Joel? What are some? Is it different from iOS as far as like programming languages go? Or what's in common also as well?
Yeah. So Android uses really like two main languages. There's Java and there's Kotlin, which ends up transpiling to Java at the end of the day. And then for native libraries, it's either like C or C++, but that gets just compiled down to assembly. So like Don said, it's important to realize that like a lot of the stuff that you might care about in mobile is like literally just like the normal stuff that you're used to like working with. It's just like HTTP requests and like, get and post and parameters, and like it's just like fiddling with HTTP requests. Like that is the majority of what the app is doing at the end of the day, for the most part, like in most cases, right? Then there's like a whole separate layer like underneath that of like mobile bugs, which are like not like they're bugs within like the app itself. It's like, oh, I can open a web view that lets me hit your JavaScript interface and like do stuff with the app that I shouldn't be able to do. Like that can't happen anywhere else. That's not like specific. Like you can't send an HTTP request that like, you know, just like triggers that, or like, you know, well, maybe you can't, but you know, I think you understand what I'm getting at, right? Like, and that whole aspect is like a whole other thing. And so generally what I'll say is like, I'm all for like following the path of least resistance, right? Like if you don't need to like go and learn something, like don't stress out like trying to learn like everything you need to know for mobile before you like start and hack a mobile app. Like just do it one step at a time. Like take apart the app. If you hit a wall, like start like trying to figure out what that wall is and like get yourself familiar with it. Like it will help to have some of those fundamentals. Like go and just like follow some like basic like writing an Android app 101. Like it's just some guide. I'm sure Google has like a developer guide for like creating your first app, and that will walk you through like the fundamentals of like the components of an app from the developer perspective, like how the code works, how it connects with the interface. When you click a button, how does that like do things, and like how is that structured in the app? Like those types of like very basic things will help fill in the gaps when you're looking at something and you're not sure what you're looking at. If you can see just like little things that you identify or things that make sense that you're familiar with, those are like really great like stepping stones to get you to like the final answer that you're trying to like understand. And over time, that like information, that context and that knowledge will like build on itself. And the more apps that you look at, you'll be like, oh, I recognize this. I know what I'm looking at. I know what an Android manifest.xml is. I know what resources are. I know what a strings.xml is. I know how to find where the app like starts. Like all those types of things, like those are constants across apps. And over time, like you can definitely figure those things out.
Fair enough. So, I mean, it feels like you got to know how to make it before you can break it with mobile apps, right? And you don't have to, but it gives you a huge advantage to understand. It's a thing with web hacking, right? If you don't know how you can configure MySQL, Apache, and PHP together, you're going to have a hard time navigating through those things, right? So things like the concept is across the board for anything you're hacking on, especially with mobile hacking, to understand these things, to get better at them. And I think with mobile, you rely more on being able to read the code because you have to understand how it works, because you know, there's so much you can do with the app itself, right? Versus when you have access to the code itself, it makes it a lot easier and probably easier to find.
But again,
ones or leads.
Again, it's important to remember that like that is like a whole separate layer of like mobile security. Like you can do like mobile hacking while like barely touching the app itself, right? Just like proxying it, and like you are like hacking on the app. You're looking at endpoints that the app uses,
right?
And a lot of times those are like unique endpoints, and you could do all that stuff without having to like learn how to code and stuff. But if you want to go deeper, and like if you start running into like certificate pinning or something like that, you might have to dig into the code and start to like figure out, you know, like, oh, how does this work? Like at a deeper level, you know?
Yeah, I mean, it goes the same with web. Sorry to cut you off, Dom. If you have the source code and you have the app in front of you, you have an advantage of having the code, right? And understanding what the code does. Sorry, Dom, what were you going to add?
I was just going to say, even coming from the network perspective, just trying to differentiate between things that the app is doing and things that maybe a framework or a library that the app is using, like some third-party component that has been incorporated for, I don't know, analytics maybe, or something like that. And so looking at traffic, it might not be immediately obvious that, oh, these requests were sent by the app. These requests were sent by this library, that the developer may not even know that those requests are going out because they did not write that code. So having that deeper level of understanding can get you a little bit further in trying to figure out, okay, there's different domains here that I have to consider, and stepping into one might not mean that I'm touching the other one at all. So once you start to like unravel the code, you can sort of see more clearly where some of those separations are.
Yeah.
I think Joel actually covered my next question pretty well, but maybe for iOS we do have some more things. So I was going to ask, what are some of the basic concepts you actually need to know, or you recommend to to people starting to learn before going into hacking mobile apps? Joel again covered that pretty well, recommending learning how to build an app and understanding how Android works, or an Android application works. What about iOS, Don? Do you think there is a similar thing for that?
Yeah, I definitely think there's sort of a parallel track there for iOS, where getting the practice of just building sort of a hello world app is pretty simple and straightforward, and a really good way to sort of learn about how the app operates, what it looks like. I mean, just building the app and then taking it apart again. So you get that IPA file, which is your application package file. It's a zip file, right? You unzip it, you start picking apart what's inside it. You can even do that with apps that you download off of the App Store. You know, pull it off of your device, unzip it, see what's in there. How do different ones look? Like, are there differences and similarities that you can pick out? Maybe one was built with a different framework, and you can tell because of the way that the application package is laid out. So I think just those very understandable basics of, you know, I know how to unzip a file. I know how to look at the contents and see what's there. I know how to maybe use grep and search for strings. That's a really good, straightforward way to do kind of reverse engineering without having to ever pick up a true reverse engineering tool or disassemble anything. Dumping strings from files, that's one of the first ways that a lot of people approach black box analysis on compiled binaries. You know, that's something that's really easy to do as well. And then things like interacting with the app, clicking around, like if you have an App Store app, clicking around the app, trying to identify what are different components that you see, like, you know, how does a web view look versus a native component? What are different elements, and how do those map to something that you would see, like, say, in Xcode if you were building an app? Getting that kind of understanding, it's actually somewhat rare, actually, for especially starting out. A lot of people neglect kind of the client side of things and really looking at how to break down the UI and those components. And that's where a lot of vulnerabilities that rely on the UI get missed. So when you think about things like cross-site scripting in a web view, that requires a little bit more subtle understanding of what's going on in the UI and how you're interacting with some of those client-side components. And so if you gloss that over, if you sort of miss that completely, there are bugs that you're never going to find just because you're not trying to decompose the client-side elements. So I think all of those sort of baseline elements of understanding, you know, of building an app and tearing it back down again and seeing how those two ends relate to each other can be really, really useful when you're just starting out. And from there, I think there's so much in mobile that you can focus on. It's really finding that thing that you have the affinity for, whether it is the network part, whether it is the, you know, spelunking on the file system to find the sensitive data that's maybe getting cached somewhere that the developer doesn't realize, whether it's the UI. I mean, there's a lot of different places you can focus. And so I think it's kind of figuring out which is the one that fascinates you and just start digging at that one, start picking away at it. And I think that at that point, kind of the sky's the limit. You can find a lot of interesting things.
Yeah, I think. Oh,
go ahead, Ari.
No, I was just going to say that. Yeah, I think that you can basically split two different parts of testing for any mobile application, right? We have the static analysis and the dynamic analysis. I saw a question in the chat there saying, can you actually use Burp Suite to intercept the request from mobile? And that's, yeah, definitely. Mm-hmm. And I think what you were saying is very interesting. Like, to find what you actually feel comfortable doing. If you feel more comfortable doing on the dynamic analysis and checking all the mobile application, like that's just like a web application, that might be your thing to do. And if you actually want to go deep and, you know, have a chance of looking those more specific bugs, which definitely are harder to get in my opinion, definitely go and do the static analysis. I think that's a great opportunity as well because it's not something everyone is looking, right?
Right.
Let's make this real. We give you a mobile app. What are the first few things you do?
I mean, the first thing I always do is decompile it. I have like a set of tools that I have over time. Like I basically shortcuts that just like run up 4 different things or whatever. And so it'll just like pull apart the app, decompile the source, decode the resources, and like rename it into like a version folder or whatever, like for me. And then I'll open that folder in VS Code. And then I'll start looking at a couple of things right off the bat. I look at any exposed schemas within the app. So like Android apps have this concept called schemas where like you can register them on the device and you could do like Snapchat : / whatever. And like it'll handle that somehow. And so those have to be explicitly declared like how they work. And so I wrote a tool that will parse the app. And I think it's even public on my GitHub, and it'll basically tell you like these are the names of the classes and these are the schemas that they handle, and then you can look at that, and if anything looks interesting then you can look further into that in the code. I also will just like right off the bat, just like grep for certain strings, like things I know are dangerous, like crypto, uses of crypto, uses of like secret, like decrypting things, encrypting things. And then I might start looking for just like endpoints and just to see. This is generally like probably the turning point where I would like install the app and run it if I haven't done that already, and just start like proxying it and seeing like, what are some interesting requests? Do I see something that like catches my interest? And if I do, then I'll like take that endpoint and I'll search it in the code and I'll see where is it being called in the code? Like, where does that data come from the app and that kind of stuff.
What about you, Don? How does it look with an iOS app?
Yeah, I would say for iOS, the workflow is really similar, except that there's no, decompiling that would happen as part of that process. So I'm definitely going to unzip the package. I'm going to poke around and see if there's any assets in there that are interesting. I'm going to dump the strings out of the binary just, to be able to do some quick analysis, look for things that look like maybe API keys or secrets or, any kind of encryption keys, random strings. And I'll probably throw the main application binary into something like Radare and just see how the application flows from the main entry point, see if there's anything interesting that catches my eye. One thing that I do similarly to Joel is look at URL schemes for iOS, which is kind of the same thing where you can craft a custom URL that will redirect to your application, and then you can process whatever input is passed there. So I like to see if those handlers are installed when I'm looking at the disassembly, and like what, if there is a handler there, what is the actual flow once it gets the input? Is it, examining something? Is it just opening something? Maybe it's, chucking something into a web view. I kind of want to see if there's any obvious weaknesses there that I can exploit right off the bat. And then, yeah, I do like to install the app and sort of click around and get the full scope of the functionality. And what I might do next, a lot of times it depends on how well I know the app. If it's something that I've used, usually I have some idea in my head of an attack path that I want to pursue. If I'm unfamiliar with it, though, I'm going to create an account. I'm going to click around. I'm going to see what kind of functionality there is and just take some notes on what I observe and like, okay, if I'm an attacker, here's the thing that I might want to go after. And then I'll branch off from there, trying to pursue some of those leads.
And something you mentioned, when you were talking, it's every application could have some sort of protection or, limitations when you're trying to actually do all these things we are talking about. One of those, for example, is Ssl Pinning or, root detection or jailbreak detection or a bunch of others. Can you explain a little bit of that, like what those are and what happens when you actually find those?
Let's start with iOS.
Sorry for that. I always forget to
that's okay.
Give you the answers. I will get there. I promise. I will get there.
Yeah. So
we'll put it with your old age. That's all it is.
Whoa.
Damn.
You're not getting any breaks today.
All right, that's it, folks. I'm out. Sorry, John.
Only Monday. Whoa.
I guess we can start with certificate pinning. So I think to understand certificate pinning, first, to take a step back, you have to understand that anytime an application is going to try and establish a secure connection to an endpoint, there's a process that takes place to make sure that the application can identify that endpoint and actually validate that it is who it says it is. So, the server is going to present a certificate. The certificate's going to say, hi, I'm a server. This is my name. And these are the authorities that vouch for me. They've signed off and they say that I am actually who I say I am. And there's a set of common authorities that browsers and devices are all going to be built into trust by default. So if you get a certificate as an application and you see all those trusted authorities have signed off on it, you can be like, cool, I believe you, server. I'm going to talk to you. We're going to have this secure connection. But some applications want to take it a step further than that. They want to say, look, I already know what the certificate looks like for the server I'm talking to. It's my server. I know the fingerprint of that certificate. I know exactly what it is. So why should I go through this whole exchange? I can just look at the certificate and be like, yeah, this is the right one. So they'll build in checks to actually examine the certificate and compare it to what it knows it should look like. And if there's a disparity, it'll reject it. Even if all of those, fancy certificate authorities are like, yeah, no, it's totally legit. The application can say, no, this isn't right. And they can reject it. So this gets around some issues where, for instance, if it's my device, I can install my own authority, my own trusted authority on the device and say, hey, whatever this authority trusts is cool with me, regardless of whether it's secure or not. So an application can put a stop to that right out the gate. Yeah. So certificate pinning, honestly, is something that I still don't see in every app. It's kind of a crapshoot. Sometimes I see it, sometimes I don't. I have a few free scripts for different versions of iOS that I will inject into the app right when it starts. And that basically will remove any certificate pinning issues at a very low level of the operating system. So there's only a few instances where it wouldn't work. In the very common case, it will basically negate any certificate pinning that the application is doing. That's usually my go-to. Things like jailbreak detection, same thing. If they're doing some very straightforward jailbreak detection, like, let me see if this particular file that the jailbreak installs is present on the operating system. Well, I can use free to just hook into, the open command, and it can be like, nope, I don't see that file. It's not here. Nothing to see here. Just move right along. And like, the app isn't going to know any differently. So that's kind of my first attempt is always going to be like my go-to scripts in Frida to try and just basically make the application think that everything is fine.
So it seems like with iOS and Android, the limitations are the same almost, right? You have the similar limitations with cert pinning, root devices, whatever. But is the solution the same for Android as it is with iOS, Joel?
Yeah, I mean, for the most part, I would say it's fairly similar. Like, at the end of the day, cert pinning works the same way, and like, it's really designed like in the mindset of like, you're in a coffee shop and like you leave your laptop unlocked or something, or you're using like a library, like a public computer or something, and somebody has installed a malicious cert on there, and they want to make sure that even if there is a malicious cert on that device, or it's being used in an untrusted way, that like the data is still handled securely by the application. Right. And so like, if you think about it that way, like really you just like write a hook or something like and cut it out, or like make it work in a certain way, and like it'll get past that. I think the only instance of like something that's really challenging to get around is like if there are persistent like hardware-based attestations. And I think Android's one of, I don't know if iOS has a parallel for this, but like with safety net, like the newer safety net, there's hardware-based attestations, and that'll generate like security tokens that are like hardware-based. Like there's a thing in the phone physically that's like helping do that, and there's like not an easy way around that. And if those are used like continuously throughout the app, like if it's beyond just like login or something, that's where it can start to get really challenging to get around. And you might have to find more creative ways to just like look at what's going on there, or like do entirely static analysis at that point and just be like, I know how the app like should be working, like based on the code, but like there's no way that I can actually like introspect it and like look at it without it starting like and throwing stuff and getting funny. And like it's I'm a little conflicted how to feel about this. Like as an AppSec engineer, it's like, yeah, this is great. Like this is a great security feature. As a security researcher, it's like, this sucks. Like this is so hard to get around. You know? Yeah. So like, there's always like two sides to it. But I think like a lot of the like techniques are basically the same. Like I have my set of free scripts for like jailbreak or root detection and like Ssl pinning bypasses. I think I actually put a script also in that blog post for HackerOne about a year ago for like the script that I mainly use as my go-to like cert pinning remover. And yeah, like if there's anything like specific beyond that, then I will start to dig into the app itself.
I think that one of the key items I get from this, except for the hardware version, ignore that, most of these controls or protections are normally client side, right? Most of them. So basically, in most of the situations, there is a bypass to it, right?
Yeah, and sometimes it's just the matter of how much time do you want to spend trying to bypass something. There's certainly runtime protections that it can be, like Joel said, a real pain if you're a researcher to try and get around. And it's like, what do you want to sync to get around that particular protection? Like hours, days, weeks, months, it kind of depends on what it is you're after. Like what's your goal? So you might give up, or you might be invested and really want to break whatever that application is trying to do.
Right. But at the end of the day, it's all right there. Like that's the one thing about mobile security. It's all right there. Like you have the app, anything that it's doing, it's right there. You just have to find it and figure out how it works.
That's cool. One more question related to this. Does Frida actually lets you do all these bypasses and all these things right now, or do you actually need a bunch of different tools to actually bypass the things and start actually doing your pen test or back bounty?
So typically, so out of the box, just installing Frida isn't going to get you all of these custom scripts and things. However, there are quite a few floating around the internet. That Frida code share site I mentioned has some that you can just download and use right off the bat, out of the box. And they're pretty easy and straightforward. And a lot of them are going to work for you right off the bat. There's other places where you can find a blog post, explaining how to use a Frida script to approach a certain situation that might be a little bit more of a one-off. And in other cases, you don't really have a choice but to write something yourself that Frida is going to inject into the application because it's doing something that is very unique. So I've encountered that a lot on pen tests where an application has some kind of custom encryption, or they're doing something funky before sending a network request out to a server that you want to modify. And then you are actually crafting something very application specific just to treat that case. So it really depends a lot on the situation.
Joe, anything? I'm just saying, asking if Joe wants to add anything, or
no. I mean, we have the basically unofficial spokesperson for Frida here. I fully agree with that answer. I fully agree. Like Frida by itself, extremely powerful tool. It's like, are lockpicks like owning lockpicks a crime? No. Like, how do you use those lockpicks? Like, it's a tool set. Like, how do you use those tools can vary. Like, you can use Frida and never reverse engineer an app. You could use it for debugging entirely, or you could only use it for hacking. It really just depends on how you want to use it.
But definitely use it for hacking.
Yeah. One thing that I've learned from this whole thing is Frida, and Frida. But we almost had time, and we were a little bit past time actually, but I want to end this on a different note of we did the whole iOS, Android versus each other, right? But in terms of bug bounties, is there an advantage of doing mobile hacking versus doing what 90% of people do, web hacking, right? Is there an advantage to it? Let's start off with you, Joel.
I mean, why are we having this episode? You know what I mean? Yeah, of course. Yeah. Like, I think mobile hacking is a severely under-tapped space. Like, even since I first started, that was the first thing everybody said to me, my first life hacking. It was like, oh, you do mobile? Wow. Like, you're going to get tons of bounties because nobody does mobile. And it's still like that. Like, there are a couple people who Dawn and I, we are we do almost all entirely mobile. And I can name in probably two hands, the number of people who really do only mobile. And so there are there's a lot of room for growth, and there's a lot of stuff just waiting to be hacked within the mobile space. And please, join the space, learn about mobile hacking, create resources for other people. The more people that are involved, the more that we can share knowledge, right?
Yeah. And then Don, what about you? Do you have anything to add about how mobile hacking is kind of underrated, and if there's an advantage to doing mobile hacking when it comes to bug bounties?
I definitely think you'll find a very gracious welcome if that's what you decide to focus on. I've been approached by a lot of representatives from different bounty programs who are like, you do iOS, please come hack on our program. And I do think you'll see a lot of incentives around mobile focused bounties as well, just because they are very underrepresented. There's just not a lot of people looking for some of those vulnerability classes. So you're very likely to be one of the few, especially if you focus on on anything client side. I think the flip side to that is you have to be willing to put in, probably a bit more time. It's not as automated. You're going to be doing a little bit more legwork and probably building more tools yourself because, it's not as mature as the web app space in terms of that automation. But I think it's very rewarding and you're going to learn a lot. You're going to learn so much very broadly if you decide to work on mobile.
And on the topic of mobile hacking and bug bounties, with bug bounty programs that are web focused, do you ever use the mobile applications to extend your attack surface, by getting some mobile API calls or mobile endpoints at all?
Yeah, I'd say definitely.
Yeah.
It's a great place to look.
Yeah. And especially on really challenging bugs, look at how the mobile app handles certain things, because while the functionality may be a one-to-one with how the web does it, it's almost certainly a different API endpoint, or it's doing it in a more restful way, or an API friendly way, because it's a mobile app. Most of the time they don't expect that you're actually going to be looking at how it works. So it's much cleaner of an API, and it's not using web isms,
Yeah.
Yeah. Or you find some weird GraphQL endpoint that didn't exist for the web, application, but suddenly it pops up in the mobile app. So yeah, you can find some pretty fun stuff that way.
That's awesome. Well, we are a little bit over time, but I want to make sure I ask that last question just because I want to show there is, not just because the mobile hacking thing is underrated, but also there is this aspect that you can extend your attack surface. You can discover more subdomains, more API calls, more endpoints, whatever that is, right? Even endpoints that may handle data differently from mobile apps versus the web requests, right? And I want to kind of echo that out. It doesn't matter how good you are with mobile hacking. There's other ways you can get into it and leverage mobile apps in bug bounties when it comes down to hacking. Ari, do you have any more questions left?
I had actually so many, but we don't have enough time. No, I mean, I will just leave it like here because we will take hours. But enjoy this a lot.
Well, lucky for our viewers, both of you have contributed to the mobile hacking month 2 years ago, and a year ago actually with you, Don. So if you want to read from Joel about Android hacking, go to our HackerOne.com blog. I think if you type in TechnoGeek HackerOne blog, it comes up. With Don, I put the Hacker 101 link a bunch of times in there. Make sure you go check them out, and also make sure to follow them both on Twitter. Great resources, both of them. Great place to hang out. Other than that, I want to thank you both for giving us your time and being here, being so open to sharing everything you know about mobile hacking, and being here as our guest. We appreciate it.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
We'll talk soon.
Was great. Thank you very much, folks.
See you guys.
See you next time.
All right, okay. We're over time. No giveaway today because of time. But who's our guest next week?
Who's our guest next week? We do have some cool guests. Cyber Mentor, aka Heath, will be here. We will also have Philip Wiley. Is that correct? I'm not pronouncing
correct.
that.
You're saying it correct. Awesome. It can't be a mentorship Monday without the Cyber Mentor, right? We gotta have a mentor in here, so it's official.
And we are going to be talking about pen test, right? A lot of pen test related stuff.
How to get into pen testing? What's pen testing like? How do you land your first pen test job, and so on. So, if you want to talk to TCM, beautiful man he is, be here next week. He's always my man crush Monday. So, if you want to come talk to him, he'll be here next week. Me and Ari will both be here as well. And we'll see you all here in 7 days.
So next Monday. See you next Monday. Thank you, Ben, once again for sharing the stage with me. And see you, chat. Thank you very much for being here. Thank you to the all new chatters out there, for all the ones actually coming here every Monday. Thank you very much. We see you next time, okay?
And thank you for letting me have some jokes. I had really a lot of fun with those jokes.
Don't worry. We can do some roasting Mondays.
Roast of Ari and Ben. All right, chat. That's it. We'll see you all next week.
Thank you all.